other markets that we might be marketing to from Indiana, we expect them to follow suit. So this program is a cooperative effort between the Indiana Board of Animal Health, Indiana Beef Council, Indiana Beef Cattle Association, our local auction markets across the state, and Purdue Extension is delivering the educational material. My name and number are down at the bottom of the first slide. So let's begin. As many of you know, disease transmission and quarantines of certain disease type events like tuberculosis or brucellosis can be a challenge. And with that in mind, the Indiana Board of Animal Health has asked all of our producers to create a premise ID. Many of you probably have that, but if you don't, I would highly recommend that you consider making a phone call or emailing the Board of Animal Health and get one. It's free, and what it does is it allows the Board of Animal Health, in the case of a contagious disease event, to be able to identify producers that are in let's say a circle of 5 miles, okay, of a disease event, so that they can be notified and take the correct procedures to minimize disease transmission outside of the area. And so it's highly recommended. We've had several cases of that. We had avian influenza down in southern Indiana, and we had some brucellosis in southeast Indiana, and this has tremendously speeded up the process. Without this premise ID, basically the personnel at the Board of Animal Health have to travel up and down roads to try to identify locations that might have cattle in our case, or birds in the case of the avian flu. It's a real simple process. Please consider doing that. Let's begin a little bit with some housekeeping. This video is about a 2-hour long video. It is able to be paused if you need to take a break along the way and restart from that point. When the video is finished, you need to take a 20-question quiz. This is a national standard. And you also need to fill out a producer contract. Basically, this contract is an agreement between you and the piece of paper that you're signing. But basically, it says that that you are agreeing to follow, to the best of your ability, the BQA standards. And for those producers that don't believe in the Beef Quality Assurance Program or are not willing to sign the producer contract, we will not issue a BQA number. Once you finish the quiz, you need to review that quiz with the extension educator, and that information then will be sent to Purdue, and we will enter all of the information into the database, and a beef quality assurance card with your number will be sent to you. I need to also kind of indicate how we're handling the database. Purdue Animal Science will control the privacy of the producer BQA database. It will only be shared with the national BQA database. It will not be sold or shared with anybody else. From a producer perspective, you have the responsibility to share your BQA certification card, and it will be a business card type size that you can put in your wallet. It will have your number, and it will have the expiration date on it. The BQA program is good for 3 years, and so 3 years from now you will need to recertify. And you need to share your buyer card and number with buyers before sale date. All right, you don't want to be delivering cattle on the day of the sale or the day before the sale, and try to get into the database. So be proactive and share that number well in advance of selling your cattle. And those buyers would be if you sell direct, okay, if you're large enough and you're selling semi-loads to one of the packers, either Tyson or National. We expect JBS and Cargill to join forces in that in this, but you need to share that with your packer buyer. If you are selling through an auction market, your fed cattle, then the auction market needs to have your BQA card and number so that they can enter that into the database. The benefits of BQA are from a producer perspective is really it's a good business management. Okay, and as we go through this program, hopefully you'll see some areas that you can identify where maybe we could improve performance. It will give you better market access, okay, for sale value. If you don't BQA certify, okay, at this moment in time, Tyson will not be a bidder on your cattle. It does demonstrate a positive animal welfare to not only you and your operation, but also it's a consumer benefit. Improved public image of our industry and reduced government intervention. If we don't do this and do the right thing for the right reasons on our own, okay, some of these things will be mandated, and I don't think we want to go down that path. From the consumer standpoint, it gives them some confidence that we have a safe, consistent, wholesome product, and it gives them some insurance that our beef products are defect-free. Let's do a little bit of background, okay, in terms of meat quality. The National Beef Quality Audit, okay, is funded by your checkoff dollars, and every 5 years since 1991, this beef quality audit has been conducted. And what it's really geared towards is identifying challenges that we have in our industry that relate to meat quality. And what are the lost opportunities from an economic perspective that come into play because of quality defects. And the other part of it is that it's really about improving beef demand among our consumers. So let's look at the most recent audits going all the way back to 1991, okay, and every 5 years. And if you look at the 2011 and 2016 audits, what you see at the top of the list, and this is an aggregated response of virtually the entire beef production chain, and food safety was identified as the #1 problem. Eating satisfaction came in #2 in 2011 and 16, but we see some remnants of that also appearing in previous audits. Obviously, eating satisfaction is a palatability factor. It's based on marbling and tenderness. And so we see some commonality as we go through the different audits. So one of the big weaknesses that we have historically is that we've had somewhere in the neighborhood of 55 to 60% of the cattle that come into the packing plant, coming out of the feedlots, have been choice grade. In 2008, we saw a pretty significant jump, and that trend continues. And if you look at where we're at today, we're running about 75% of the cattle coming into the packing plant out of our feedlots are now grading choice. And so we've made some significant improvements over the course of time. The next item on the beef quality audit is lean, fat, and bone ratios. And you see that appearing in various ways in all previous audits: external fat, seam fat, and that whole issue of lean, fat, and bone. If we look at yield grade across the national audits, we have been running pretty close to a 3.1 yield grade, okay, as an average. That means that we have some yield grade 2s and 1s and 2s, okay, if you think of this as a bell-shaped curve around a mean, and we still have some yield grade 4s and 5s, all right? But we've not seen much change in the yield grade since 1991. Quality grade, okay, has tended upward, okay, as we just kind of talked about in the previous slide. So the marbling scores, 600, okay, would be select, 700 would be choice, and so we're right there at low choice, okay, average for all of our cattle. The adjusted back fats have been pretty constant, somewhere in that 5/10 of an inch to 55/100 of an inch is pretty consistent across the National Beef Quality Audits. Hot carcass weight has been increased significantly over the course of time. That may suggest that maybe our cattle are starting to get big enough, okay? Particularly when we start to think about consumer demand for portion control and those kinds of things. Ribeye area has also increased over since 1991 pretty significantly. Again, that gets into our portion control scenario, and a 1-inch steak, okay, cooks different than a 1/2 inch steak, and if you were trying to target maybe a 10-ounce portion, all right, that becomes a problem, okay? Eating characteristics and cooking characteristics change as we change the thickness of our cuts. The next item on the National Beef Quality Audit is weight and size, and we've kind of just started to allude to that. And if you look at the previous audits, we see some commonality across those. When we look at carcass weight versus ribeye size, and we talk about that in terms of a 1-inch steak, the sweet spot in the market is for a 12 to 13 ounce ribeye that's 1-inch thick, all right? The red line on the top of this graph is yield grade 2s. And if we're going to try to hit that 12 to 13 ounce ribeye at 1 inch, that means that we're somewhere in that 760 pound carcass weight to about 825 pounds. When we move into the yield grade 3s, which is the center dark line, those carcass weights can be up in that about 825 to just a tick over 900 pounds. When we have yield grade 4s, okay, the hot carcass weight would then jump to about 900 to about 950. Point here is that as we change yield grades, we're going to change steak size, and proportionally we need to change hot carcass weight. Now, if we look at where we're at as of October 1, 2018, the average heifer carcass coming into the packing plant is 819 pounds. That translates to about 1,325 pound live weight. On the steer side, steers on October 1, 2018 were averaging just right at 900 pounds, which is about a 1,450 pound. And if you look at that, our yield grade 3 cattle, okay, which is kind of the industry standard, choice yield grade 3s is kind of the base, we do a pretty good job on yield grade 3s hitting that sweet spot. The frequency distribution by carcass weight is kind of shown on this slide. Just notice that it's a bell-shaped curve, okay? The average, as we kind of said, okay, is kind of in that 850 to 900 pound range, but we have some spread around that, all right? That means that about 3.4% of the cattle coming into the packing plant are probably too light and would receive a discount because of light carcass weights. And we would have somewhere in the neighborhood of about 12% of the cattle that are probably too heavy. In other words, too heavy a carcass weights. Now, we're getting two different market signals, okay? The consumer says we want smaller portion size. The packers, okay, in the case of Tyson, for example, do not discount carcasses until they hit about 1050. Okay, so if I was a producer producing feedlot cattle, okay, I guess my target would be about 1,450, 1,500 pound cattle to give me a 1,040 pound carcass, 1,045 pound carcass, and if I could do that consistently, that probably is where I would make the most money because weight still drives the return. The next one down on the beef quality audit list is how and where cattle are raised. We've only seen that appear in the last 2 audits, but I think this kind of indicates that the consumers are really interested about knowing about where their products, okay, that they consume come from, and beef is no different than some of the other products. And then the last one is visual characteristics as it's in the display case. So another big weakness that we have, or maybe it's a positive, okay, is that about 77% of the cattle coming into the processing plant have no bruises. That's good news. The problem is that we also have about 23% of the cattle coming in with some bruises. And so one of the things from a beef quality assurance standpoint is that we probably need to be aware that bruising can be costly. Okay, and especially if we start moving into the major, critical, and extreme cases, because that's going to result in carcass trim, okay, and less carcass weight, and a discount for producers that routinely bring in bruised carcasses. Some other weaknesses, if you look at liver condemnations, they have gone up, okay, over the course of time. And you can say, well, is that really a big deal? Well, the livers obviously are a market, a product that gets marketed into the international market. And from a producer perspective, what this increase in liver condemnations really means is that we probably are experiencing more acidosis in some of these cattle, resulting in liver abscesses and resulting then in condemned livers. Okay, if we have acidosis, we know that that's going to have a negative effect on animal average daily gain, feed efficiency, and carcass quality. The next one down on the list has also increased over time, and that's lung condemnations. Now, not too many of us sit down to a meal of lung, but from a producer perspective, what this suggests is that we're seeing more respiratory diseases. And with the respiratory diseases, we're getting congestion in the lungs, we're getting consolidation of the lungs, less ability for that animal to breathe and take on oxygen, okay, for the tissues to grow and develop. And so again, from a producer perspective, this would suggest that we're going to see reduced average daily gain, poorer feed efficiency, and poorer carcass quality as a result of it. The next two I'm kind of put in together, okay, tripe and viscera, okay, so we're talking about the internal organs. Again, we have seen a pretty significant increase in viscera condemnations. Now, not too many of us have sat down to a meal of honeycomb tripe, all right, lately, but it is one of the products that is highly valued in the international market. And when we start to think about what the value of our carcasses are, it's driven by not only our domestic consumption, but also our international consumption of some of the products that maybe we're not as interested in eating, and tripe is one of those, and viscera. Head condemnations and tongue condemnations have been decreased, and that's a good thing. That's a success story. When we start thinking about lost opportunities of feedlot cattle, all right, if you look across the table, I've highlighted 2016, okay, and the good story here is that quality grade discounts have been reduced since we started the National Beef Quality Audits in 1991. Yield grade, okay, has also improved, okay, so our discounts for yield grade, in other words, yield grade 4s and 5s, okay, which would be our discount. Carcass weight, okay, has increased, and we're starting to see more discounts on heavyweight carcasses. We don't have too much in the way of branding going on in Indiana, but if we were out west, further west, okay, where height branding is more popular and some of these branding areas, we've seen an improvement in hide damage due to hot brands. And if you think about branding, okay, if you're going to do it, all right, the brands need to be on the hip, okay, over the top of soft tissue, or on the shoulder, again, over soft tissue. Brands across the ribs are dramatically discouraged. And the reason for that is that when you put a hot brand or even a cold brand on the hide, okay, and you press that on, if you've got bone right underneath the hide, what you will do is you will thin the hide, and now you start to think about using that hide for soles of shoes, leather purses, leather jackets, etc. That becomes a problem. And then what we've seen is again a discount kind of in the offal value, And so that relates to about a $50 discount, okay, per head going through the processing plants on the average. And these prices, I should point out, are all adjusted, okay, so they're directly comparable based on 2016 prices, which is the last National Beef Quality Audit. When we look at cow and bull defects, okay, about 77% of our cows and bulls are coming in without defects. The problem is, you look at the flip side of that, we're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 23%, okay, 25%, okay, of the cattle from the cow and bull side are still coming in with high defects, all right? Beef bulls are about the same. Dairy bulls are slightly higher than our beef cattle. Point here is that when we start talking about marketing cows and bulls into the slaughter market, we need to be very, very careful. And I think one of the reasons why we see, that 25% defect rate is probably because maybe in some cases these cows are getting too thin, okay, before we pull the trigger and market those cattle. These circles kind of give you kind of an example of what we're talking about. In terms of cow and bull bruising, that's a little bit more of a problem in cows and bulls than it is on our fed cattle side. We've got about 45% of our cull cows and bulls are coming in with at least a major amount of bruising, which means that it's less than 10 pounds, okay, per carcass. And bulls, okay, we're running at about 22%, okay, major bruises, again, about 10%. But there's also some cattle that have more critical trim losses as well. Point here is that thin cattle, all right, typically bruise easier than fleshier cattle, okay, because there's obviously more cover, okay, and so think about in your operation where cattle might be bruised, okay, gateways, rough handling, okay, and we're going to talk about some of those issues as we kind of go through this program. When we think about frequency of cattle lameness, particularly in the cow and bull market, okay, somewhere in the mid-80s, okay, of the percent of the cattle are coming in without lameness problems. However, we take the flip side of that. That means we've got somewhere in the neighborhood of 15% of our beef cattle, our cows and bulls in particular, in that non-fed market, are still coming in with lameness issues. Again, we think about culling maybe a little bit earlier before these cattle are lame. All right. We know that any animal that's down, okay, is not going to be accepted by the auction market. If the cattle are down coming on a semi, okay, being delivered, or a trailer being delivered to the packer, if the animal is down, the packer will not accept them. So we need to start being really, really cautious about, okay, lameness issues and catch those early. And if that looks like it's going to be a problem that's not going to be resolvable, okay, we probably need to be marketing these cattle maybe a little bit earlier before they get thin and before they go lame. When we start thinking about muscling, all right, and we look at the middle, which is a 3 on a scoring system, that's kind of the average. We still have some cattle that are pretty well marbled, all right, but when we start looking at to the left of that, these scores of 1 and 2, these cattle are too lean, okay, don't have enough carcass fat, okay, and are going to be a discount in the marketplace. Injection site blemishes. This is a real success story. This is one of the areas that was really focused on in the very first National Beef Quality Audit in 1991. And we have made significant progress in injection site lesions. One of the ways that we've done that is that the Beef Quality Assurance Program has highly recommended that all cattle receive injections in the neck and using sub-Q procedures whenever the product allows, okay, as opposed to giving these cattle shots in the hip, okay, where it can cause significantly more muscle damage, and those muscles happen to be higher value cuts, okay? And we need to think about that. So we're down in the beef industry, we're down to about 7% injection site lesions. That's still in the round, and that's still probably too much. We need to, again, rethink about how we give injections and put all these injections in the neck. This just gives an example of what an injection site blemish is. So what we've done is we've taken a muscle and we've cut it into about 1-inch sections, and you notice that the injection site blemish translocates over several inches, all right? And back a number of years ago, we used to do what we called a slice and dice demonstration. We took an animal that was a chronic, okay, out of the feedlot, okay, that was not performing well. We gave it a series of injections, right way, wrong way, right location, wrong location, and we euthanized that animal after we gave injections by about 3 days. And we went in and we looked at those injection site lesions. And what we found is exactly what this picture shows. In the case of vitamin A, as an example, I used to be an advocate for giving vitamin A. Coming off of grass in the summer and fall, the liver will store vitamin A for 60 to 90 days, okay? And so that would take us oftentimes up to about the 1st of January. At that point, the liver would be depleted of vitamin A. A real simple solution for vitamin A then would be to give them an injection. When we did that and we looked at that injection site blemish, it translocated 5 inches. And from an injection site blemish, okay, we will have an effect on tenderness out 3 inches away from that. So now you can start to think about a tenderness issue that's at least the size of a softball, but it could be the size of a volleyball, okay, in terms of impact on tenderness in that muscle around that injection site blemish. Again, the neck is the right location. When we think about cow and bull carcasses, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this one, but we've made improvements since our early beef quality audits. We've increased fat, we've increased marbling, and we've increased carcass weight. And those obviously all three kind of go together, and that's increased the value of our cow and bull carcasses. When we look at carcass condemnations out of the non-fed cattle, okay, i.e. market cows and bulls, and we look at the total value lost, on the average for every cow and bull that goes through the packing plant, we're losing about, on today's standards, about $123 because of carcass condemnations, okay, or at least carcass trim. We've got discounts because of yellow colored external fat. We've got discounts because of inadequate muscling. And in the case of some really obese cows, okay, on the opposite side, excess external fat can also be a discount. So when we add those various discounts together, we're at about $123 a head for every cow and bull that goes through the processing plant. Now, some of you may say that the export market is really not important to me. We export just over 12% of our beef production, and quite honestly, right today, we're probably closer to 13.5%, okay, of our beef production actually gets exported in some fashion, okay, one of the cuts. And we export to over 80 countries, and it's something in excess of $300 a head, and it depends on what time frame you're looking at, but it can be over $350 a head per head of fed cattle that's added value because we have an export market. And part of that increased value comes from variety meats, okay? Remember the tripe, okay, and the viscera that we talked about? And so what do we export? Okay, if we look down this list, oxtail, heart, kidney, short ribs, tongue, hind shank, and tripus, all right? What is that? It's sliced small intestine, all right? We have a market for that in the international market. Bone marrow is another one, okay? It's a 1-inch cut of the femur bone, okay, and people will boil that and have bone marrow soup. Sweet is the hard fat around the kidney. Honeycomb tripe is reticulum. I recently had a colleague that was in China, and they had a banquet, and they served honeycomb tripe. It is the reticulum, okay, one of the chambers of the four-part stomach, okay, of beef cattle. She didn't eat it, all right, but the people around her did. About 5 minutes later, they were still chewing their first bite. It's a little bit like chewing on rubber bands. Cheek meat, sweetbreads, which is the thymus and pancreas glands, scalded tripe, which is the lining of the stomach, outside skirt, okay, liver, and inside skirt are all products, okay, that add value to our product, even though we think that, our endpoint of our production system is either the auction market or the slaughter facility. Those carcasses get broken down into pieces and parts and get distributed to wherever the market's at. And for these products, most of the market is on the international side. Value of hides, okay, if you look at the blue line down on the bottom, okay, compared to the red line, which is the average of 2012 to 2016, 2018, hide values have decreased. Why is that? Well, part of it is because we're seeing more and more synthetic products, okay? Oftentimes this vest that I'm wearing, okay, would have been in the past made of leather. This one happens to be made out of wool. But we've got nylons and all kinds of synthetic materials, not only in the clothes that we wear, the purses that our ladies carry, and even in the soles of our shoes, okay, are now being composite. So we're seeing a drop in hide value. So how do you view change, okay? And my challenge to you is to reconsider what we've done, okay, in our beef operations. We've done that in my own cattle operation, where we've gone through the system and said, okay, where can we make improvements? How can we market our cows, okay, before they get thin, okay, and where they're more easily bruised? How can we eliminate bruising, okay, by looking at our facilities, okay, and those broken hinges, the nails that might be sticking out of a broken board or whatever it might be? Where can we make improvements? And my challenge to you is that as we go through this BQA program, hopefully you can identify some areas that maybe we can make some improvements. So the program goal is to focus on daily management practices that minimize carcass defects, improve animal health and well-being, okay, which gets into safety, wholesomeness, and all the performance aspects, okay, of the products that we produce. And it will meet FDA, USDA, and EPA standards. All right, we're not going to spend a lot of time on the rules and regulations that FDA, USDA, and EPA have, but I will just make this comment. If we don't do some things correctly, okay, somebody will mandate that we do them, all right? And I think we'd rather do this on a voluntary basis. So as we go through the beef quality assurance, what we've done here in Indiana is we've merged 3 different modules that you could take online. One of those modules is a cow-calf module, one of them is a stocker backgrounding module, and the third one is a feedlot module. What we've done is we've taken elements of all 3 of those and combined them, okay, for our BQA training, with the anticipation that the other packers are going to join in with Tyson and National Beef to make this a rule and a requirement. It's real easy for Tyson right now because they only kill fed cattle, okay, of beef origin. They do not kill non-fed cattle. In other words, don't kill cows, they don't kill bulls, and they don't kill anything dairy. When Cargill, JBS, and others join into this BQA requirement, it's very likely that all of us, okay, that sell a cull cow, sell a cull bull, sell a veal calf, sell a fed dairy steer, whatever the case might be. And so what we've tried to do is we've tried to take the elements of all of those and merge those together. One of the elements that comes out of the feedlot side is hazardous analysis critical control points, or what we call HACCP. And really the bottom line of that is to prevent, reduce, control, or eliminate a hazard to an acceptable level. And that's done through protocols, all right? And I'm not saying that you have to have written protocols for everything that you do, but you probably need to have rationale for why you do things the way you do. And then train the people that work with you, all right, to have that mentality and that set of standards to follow, all right? And then continue to do some assessments as we go through. They spend a lot of time in the feedlot module talking about 7 principles of HACCP. I'm going to spend most of my time, okay, very briefly, but my challenge to you and my recommendation to you is to review all of your management programs and identify those critical control points that could have a negative effect on your animal performance, which translates to dollars in your pocket, but also the end product that we produce, and making sure that that product is safe, wholesome, and tasty and juicy and flavorful. And then identify, corrective measures. One thing that we know about stress cattle is that they can hide their sickness, and where we see this most often is in cattle that come into maybe a stocker operation or into a feedlot where you know nothing about their background, how they were handled, how they were fed, okay, how they were vaccinated, all of those things. So upon arrival, a lot of times these cattle are very nervous, they're fearful, all right? And when they are in that state, they will try to hide any sickness or lameness. And so our challenge is that if we're going to try to find those sick and lame animals quickly, okay, and not let that disease state or that lameness state get to an extreme level, we need to be able to identify those cattle. And so this is where patience and observation comes in, all right? Quiet cattle talk louder than wild cattle, all right? In some cases, we may see that in some of our cow operations, okay? If the cattle are not quiet, okay, when you go out, you got a dog, you got a four-wheeler, you got whatever it might be, if those cattle get fearful, all right, they're going to hide any symptoms of sickness or lameness. And our challenge is then to be able to identify those things quickly. And so one of the things that we see in the feedlots out west is that now what they're doing upon arrival, they're going in and they're doing training sessions with their cattle, 5 to 10 minute training sessions. If you're going to be on horseback, you go out on horseback and you kind of walk through the cattle quietly, let the cattle get used to the horse and the rider. If you're out there on foot, okay, then walk through the cattle quietly. And sometimes the cattle that you really need to be watching might be in the second layer or the third layer deep in a group, all right? But they're the ones that have their head up, okay? They're watching you, all right? They kind of are the leader, okay? And what you need to do is you need to make these cattle feel comfortable, okay, and less fearful. As you do that, you can actually work the cattle from a distance, okay, figure out how to move them, all right, and you can gently move them to the feed. You can gently move them to the water supply and some of those things. So things that we're going to be looking for is feed left, okay, are animals sorting themselves off from the group, okay, look at the manure, okay, in the pen. Do we have consistent manure that's acceptable? Hair and performance, okay, are other areas that we need to think about. And then reading body condition and weight change across not only the feedlot cattle, but the stockers as well as the cow-calf. And are we making improvements in those areas? So stress from animal handling, okay, is another issue. So one of the things that we talk about in beef quality assurance is low stress animal handling. And the reason for that is that stressed animals have a reduced immune function, okay, in other words, their ability to fight disease. They have reduced rumen function, or their ability to digest and absorb nutrients, which is going to translate into reduced average daily gain, feed efficiency, and poorer reproduction. Okay, we can also see bruises when cattle that are handled a little too roughly, and at the carcass endpoint, cattle that are stressed, okay, oftentimes have dark cutters. And for those of you that that have heard that term but don't really realize what that is. When these carcasses are hung on the rail, they're chilled, okay, and within 24 to 48 hours, they're ribbed, okay. In other words, we make a cut between the 12th and 13th rib. What that does is then it lowers the ribeye, and so I can evaluate it, all right. When that cut is made, the color of that lean tissue is purple. Okay, within 30 to 45 minutes after that cut has been made and that surface has been exposed to oxygen, it turns a bright cherry red color. That's the color that consumers expect to see in the display case at the grocery store. All right. If that color stays purple, all right, and does not turn to a bright cherry red color, we have what we call dark cutters. Consumers are going to reject that product. Not to say that that product is necessarily spoiled or bad, but they have been trained that the bright cherry red color is what's desirable. Okay, so if a dark cutter exists at the packing plant, that will translate into a discount in terms of the fed cattle. This slide kind of demonstrates or illustrates kind of the bright cherry red color on the left and the dark cutter, okay, on the right. The result of dark cutters is it really is a depletion of muscle glycogen because of the stress, okay, so that's the energy that's stored in the muscle, okay, and what happens is you end up with a high pH in the final carcass. And it's caused by stress, okay? The critical time is the last 48 hours before harvest. It happens because of rough handling, long transport, extended periods without feed and water, sometimes mixing groups, overcrowding, okay, both in the sorting pens and also on the transport vehicle. In some cases, it can be genetics, okay, and we know that some cattle are more flighty than others because of their genetic composition, and those are cattle maybe that we need to start to think about culling in our herds. And then obviously weather extremes, okay, at the time of marketing. Now, cattle basically communicate in three different ways. Sight, okay, and cattle would prefer line of sight. The second one is sound, okay, usually stressful, marginally successful, okay. Sometimes you can say, you know, make some comments or make some commands to cattle and it may work, okay, but screaming and hollering is just going to increase the stress level, okay. So low sounds, deep sounds are better than high-pitched, loud sounds. And then touch is the third way, all right. So if we think about the animal's ability based on sight for line of sight, if you think about animal eyes, okay, on prey animals, and cattle would be a prey species, their eyes are out on the side of their head, all right? That gives them a completely different view than us as humans, which have our eyes in front of us, all right? And animals that have their eyes out in front are predators, all right? So you think about dogs, coyotes, wolves, okay, etc., eyes out front. Cattle have the eyes out on the side. They are prey animals. All prey animals have them out on the side. That distorts their vision, all right? But it also gives them a little different field of vision. And so what you see is that the blue area on that diagram is what cattle, the area that they can see. Directly behind those animals is a blind spot. Now, if an animal turns its head a little bit, we can extend that a little bit differently, all right? But in general, what you see is what's happening there. So the eye placement becomes important. They're lateral instead of frontal, all right? And that gives them a wide-angle vision. It allows animals to scan the environment, all right? Again, because they are prey, they're always on the lookout for movement, okay, and anything that could cause them to be eaten by another animal, for example, all right. Because of this eye placement, they have poor depth perception, all right. So some of you may have looked through a fisheye lens on a camera before, all right. I like to look at the picture down in the bottom left of the BMW, all right. Directly in front of the animal, the focus is pretty good. But as as you get further and further out from the center of that picture, notice that things start to get distorted. All right. Now the cattle vision is a much bigger circle than that. So expand that beyond, okay, what you see here in this vision. All right. So let me describe the scene here. If you look on the gating on the left, there's a sweatshirt just hanging on that gate. It's not flopping in the breeze, but it's going to be a distraction for these cattle. As we come closer to the front of this picture, you'll see 2 feed sacks alternated along the alleyway. And then right down at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a 2x6 laying in the alleyway. Let's see how these cattle react to these different obstacles. As these animals come down the alley, notice the animal on the left coming up hard, sees the sweatshirt, bounces, sees the feed sack, comes to a screeching halt, puts their head down, and brings that obstacle into focus. The later animals are going to basically follow the leader. Let me set the stage for this scene. On the right-hand side on the gating, there are 3 sweatshirts, different colors. And at this point, the breeze is blowing a little bit, and these sweatshirts are flopping in the breeze. The other part of this scene is that you see the shadows of the gating, and so the cattle are going to react to the sweatshirts as they see them, okay, and then they're going to bounce over to the left-hand side. Let's see what happens. Notice how these animals react to the sweatshirts, and then they will follow the path of where there's no shadow. Let me set the stage for this scene. This is one where it demonstrates how animals want to go around you. And so what I'll do is I'll step over to the right, and these cattle will go around on my left. I'm standing in the middle of the alleyway. I'm going to step over to the right, and these cattle are going to go around me. Let's talk a little bit about animal handling, okay? And this really relates to low stress animal handling. Would you rather be asked or told to do something? Okay, which makes you feel more comfortable or more compliant? Well, cattle prefer to be asked, okay? And how do you do that? How do you ask the cattle to do what you want them to do? It's by how you position yourself. There are 5 basic principles to animal handling. First of all, cattle want to see you, okay? Remember that the eyes are out on the side of the head, so their vision is different than ours. The second one is cattle want to go around you, and we can use those 2 principles as we think about animal handling. The other part of that is that cattle have what we call a flight zone, okay? And in this diagram, what you see is a circle, all right? The old show heifer, that circle is virtually non-existent. All right, but in a lot of our cattle, all right, the flight zone could be 20 feet, could be 100 yards, okay, and we probably have all experienced cattle that were kind of flighty, okay, and that was created in part by maybe their genetic makeup, but part of it could be in how those animals were handled previously. The other part of this is that cattle have a point of balance. That point of balance is the shoulder. When you're in front of that shoulder, cattle will tend to stop, okay, and they may turn around and go away from you. If you're behind that shoulder, what will happen is these cattle will move forward. So when we start talking about animal handling, what we're going to be working on is the edge of the flight zone, okay, and we're going to use the left eye and the right eye, all right? So if I want cattle to go in a straight line, I'm going to probably do a circle, okay, a semicircle, okay, a zigzag pattern, so the cattle can see me out of the left eye and out of the right eye, all right? And those cattle will then tend to focus on moving straight forward. The other angle that becomes kind of critical is that 45-degree angle off the shoulder, all right, as to a handler kind of stepping into the flight zone. All right, animals move. you reward them by stepping back out of the flight zone. Okay, so you're always working on that edge of that flight zone, and as that animal moves, you're moving with it. All right, inside and outside of that flight zone. All right. Here's a video that demonstrates the point of balance. In this scene, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the point of balance on the shoulder. And so you're going to see me step across to my right, and then I'm just going to move to control the animal. I'm going to step over to the right. I'm going to play the shoulder. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to take a couple steps forward and a couple steps back, and notice that the animal starts and stops at my command. And also watch the ears of the animal. Whenever I step back, okay, typically the ears go forward. As the animal moves forward, they come back. And we're just going to do that a couple times until we get to the end of the alleyway, and I let her go around me like the other principals.